Hey guys, Cam here. Welcome back to the build room. In this week's episode, we are getting to the bottom of the rear end on Violet Crumbles, and we're going to see how bad the damage is, and we're going to do some cutting, some welding, and some panel beating. So stick around and check it out. Alright, so in last week's episode we unveiled the R34, which was pretty cool, but in the episode before that we were sorting out this rear panel here, and we took a bunch of dents out all through this section using this spot welding dent puller, and to be honest it came up really well. I'm really happy with it. I've still got to go through and fix the rust, but yeah, overall it's pretty straight, but that damage was caused by what I think was a pretty big rear ender. So you can see down here where we haven't taken the dent puller, and there's still a lot of black marks here, and the black marks are low spot, so I basically sand this back, sprayed it with black spray paint, and then sanded it again. So anywhere there's a black mark is a low spot. So there was obviously a fair amount of damage in here that's been pulled out straight near the bumper and then just body fill it over. I mean, the car still has a reasonable amount of shape here, so it wasn't sort of something that crushed the car back to here, but I'd say a pretty big dent here that transferred probably its load into the chassis rails and tweaked it slightly. Now, if we come around to the back side of the car, you can see that the lines here on the bumper and this one over here aren't great, and there's body filler in here that's cracking. We can also see that these marks here where the chrome is cracked, I would say those are from the bumper being dented quite significantly and then hammered flat. So basically putting a block of wood behind this bumper and knocking it flat, probably on a table, not on the car. But that cracking you see in the chrome is sort of what happens when you do bring these back to their original shape. So yeah, I'd say pretty big hit for the bumper. There's also some dents in the roll pan down here. You can see quite a big one right there. So yeah, all evidence points to a pretty big hit. We've got another big dent here, and you can actually see there's a protruding bit here that will probably be from the boot sheet metal. So it's been pushed forward to the point where it's hit the internal sheet metal on the boot. So not looking great. Now we also fixed the rust in this bottom section of the quarter previously, and obviously also this bit here. They were early on, but I don't know what the sheet metal is like under this panel, and obviously that side was a big surprise, so I really don't know what I'm in for here. We've also got a big rust hole here and a lot of filler around it, and I'd say that continues all the way through, and there's some more holes down that end, so I'm going to strip all of this back just to see what's underneath and what it's going to take to fix. Now, obviously these bits are going to be hard to fill without taking out the glass, so I'm not sure I'm at the point where I want to take the glass out yet. I do really want to get this back together and get it on its wheels and be able to move it out of the garage for other projects before I go to the point where I strip it completely and repaint the whole car. So that means we might have to do some temporary repairs to bits like this just to get it watertight so that we don't end up having it rain and ruin any good work that we do inside the boot. So the plan for today is going to be take the boot off, take the bumper off, the tail lights, the center garnish, and the number plate mount. And then once that's off, we should be able to then start stripping all of that paint and see exactly where we are and possibly start the repairs. To be honest, I can't tell for sure until we see what it looks like. So we'll throw the camera on a tripod for now and we'll strip this out and then get onto the paint, and then we'll regroup and see where we're at. Okay, so with all of the paint stripped off now, or the majority of it anyway, you can see the damage a little bit better as expected. There's damage in here. There's a lot of rust up the top sections, across this back area, and into here, which we'd already established. A lot of these areas have been sort of knocked down and then filled with filler, which is a dodgy way to do it. There is some good news here in that these channels look to be pretty good on both sides. You know, a lot of times these areas rust out completely. And then looking at the side, it's not too bad through here, but there's a pretty bad dent up in this section here. But it's really hard to see at the moment because absolutely everything in here is just covered in Violet Crumbles dust. You can see it all under the car and everywhere. So it's really hard to tell which bits are dented and which aren't. So there's a couple of things that I want to do here. I'm pretty sure this back screen's going to come out. I'll have to make a decision on that as I go. And in order to sort of see and show you guys how bad the damage is, what I think I'm going to do is get the good bumper and some of the other bits and pieces and put them back on the car so that we can see how far out of alignment they are now that we can see the bare metal. And that should tell us whether we need to cut this end off and replace it with the one that we got off the blue car, or whether we should panel beat this because it'll be less work and a better finish in the end. Now there are a couple of fixed points on the car that we'll use to work off that, and one will be this center panel and where the boot attaches. So the boot from Violet Crumbles was absolute trash. So I do have a new boot just over there, but I'm not going to make the mistake of assuming that that is good under the paint. So I'm going to put that on as well, but we'll strip the paint off at first so that we can see exactly how everything's going to line up here. So yeah, let's get that done and then we will regroup and check it out. All right, so quick voiceover here. Pulling back some of this paint and I start to see some brown dots through the primer, and you can see shadows or black dots on the steel. That is rust worms coming from the bottom up through the paint. So obviously water ingress into the primer or polyester, no good for anyone. All right, so there it is, completely naked and somewhat reassembled rear end. And you know, maybe it looks good from afar. I don't know how this is going to show up on film, but it is far from good. There's some pretty major problems. So let's have a look. If we go down this side, we'll start at the side that I was talking about. Again, we have over this arch, not only is it hammered in through here, if we move this way, ignore my repair from previous. That actually looks pretty good in comparison to some of this stuff. But here, I don't know if that shows up, but that is very, very dented. Yeah, let me get a ruler and see if I can show you. All right, so with the ruler against it, I'm hoping the shadows will show you. It looks as bad as it actually is. So all of this mottling here where you can see light shining and shadow, they are all huge dents. So yeah, pretty big problem there. Archway. It's not too bad through here. It's actually really quite good. Got a good crease here. Good all through here. Down here we've got my old repair. I didn't strip the paint off that, but you know, that's good enough. And then it really only starts to get bad back here again. And then we have the boot lid, and honestly, this is also a disappointment. So there's a couple of things. You can see that there's been a number of really poorly done repairs here, up through here. There's a lot of dents that have been hammered out, dents through here. So I'm not sure what happened here, but I would again say this one has probably been the victim of a little bit of rust, but also a rear ender. Rust wise, if you see all along here, it looks like stitching, because it is. So that entire bottom lip has been stitched to this piece of metal here. So you do see that sort of repair fairly often on the boot lids. Basically they all rust out through here. water gets in from the back, rust out through here, and then you have to replace the whole section. But if we start to look at our lines, you see the gap here and the gap over there. Well, those two things are not on the same arc as each other, or this panel is out of alignment. Now, this panel is definitely too close to the car. If we go up here, remember that this bumper is almost, well, I would say it's perfectly OEM shape, and it sits sort of almost a finger's width away from the back there, and then it gets really tight up here. So this center section of the boot is too far forward. So when it's been rear-ended, it's been knocked in and it's not been pulled back out far enough. And if I was to pull this shroud off, I can't because of the bumper, but if I was to, you would see that a lot of the holes behind here have been elongated, as they have sort of where the boot hitch goes and a bunch of other areas, which basically means this panel is not sitting where it's supposed to be. And that is obviously a direct result of the accident damage. And I'm not 100% sure whether this boot has been repaired correctly or not. It could be that this line across here is flatter than it should be. So what they've done with these rust repairs basically is to put a piece of metal in behind this, weld it in and hammer it down so that when they filler over it, there's not a hard line that's likely to crack. So this is far less likely to crack, but also holds a lot of bog, which isn't a good solution either. So, you know, that sort of repair is not good. You really should be trying to get a good finish that is butt welded and smooth, and then you just take out any waviness with your filler. You're not filling up giant gaps around your bodgy spot welds. The good thing about this is, if you guys remember to the episode where I showed you my TA22 that I have in storage, that has a perfect boot. So what I can do is just temporarily go and pinch the boot off that car. I'll throw it onto here. I won't do it now, but I'll throw it onto here at some point, and that will tell me whether this boot is good or not. It could just be a bin job. So yeah, all things considered, a pretty rough day. I gotta say, this has not been the most inspiring thing to do on this car, but we are starting to run out of light. So I'm just gonna get tidied up here. I'll jump back on the workbench and then we'll see where we're gonna go to from here. Okay, so back, had a chance to tidy up and have another look at the car. I gotta say, it's been a pretty disappointing day overall. So much so that Violet Crumbles is in the naughty corner for a while, and I've put my Do For Now shirt on to represent something that I've got a little bit more love for at the moment. I'm not sure it'll be clear from watching some of the time lapses, but there are hours and hours of just stripping paint off the back of that car with the grinder and the stripper discs. Probably about 8 hours plus all up in the end. So yeah, really difficult and dirty, frustrating work, and a really subpar result in the end. So in terms of the work that I've done so far on Violet Crumbles, this is not its finest hour. Now, I knew going into the project that certainly there was some paint issues and some rust issues. Had I known there was that kind of accident damage in the rear, I probably would have rethought taking on the project. But we're here now, I'm not going to abandon it. The question is, how do we move it forward in a reasonable fashion? And for that, there's really two questions. And the first one is, am I going to try and panel beat and move and manipulate that rear panel until I get it into shape? Or am I going to trim it off and then take the rear end that I cut off the blue RA23, the one that we wrecked in a day, and then graft that back on in its place? I've really got to have a think about that one because there really is a lot to consider. The rear end that we cut off the blue car is relatively, or actually completely, accident free. There's a couple of small dents and there's a little bit of minor rust, but other than that, that panel is pretty good. And by cutting off the rear end on Violet Crumbles, I can address some of the sheet metal issues in the floor of the boot, and I can also check the rails a little bit more easily. I do think there is potentially some rail damage in the hoops that go over the exhaust. There is some wrinkling. Now, I've had a look at some other photos that I've seen of guys rebuilding their RA23s, and there are a number of them that have a little bit of wavy metal in there, but I think mine is wavier than most, so I do want to check that out. The good news is, same with the boot, I have an absolute virgin chassis TA22 that I can look at for comparison. So I'm hoping there's no changes in that rear end there. I don't believe there is, so I'll be able to check. And regardless, if that chassis rail is slightly tweaked, the good thing is that it's behind all of the suspension pickup points. So it's really just the end of the car that is hanging out the back. so it won't affect the drivability of the car or the stability of the car. It's just a aesthetic thing that I'm going to need to tweak. Now, I did say I might pull the windscreen out of that as I went through the cleanup. Basically, I ran out of time, so it just wasn't worth pulling it out, and I was definitely not going to get to cutting, welding, or doing any sheet metal work today. But that brings us into question 2 for the future of Violet Crumbles, and that is, currently we have no interior, no doors, no front panels. We've taken out the gearbox, the tail shaft, the diff, all of the suspension and control arms and things like that. It's a very empty shell. I didn't think it was going to get this far. There was never the intent to take Violet Crumbles back this far when I first started the project. I wanted to keep it looking ratty, but I've had to take so much of the paint off to see the damage that I'm going to have to prime that in a 2K primer, and it's never going to look like a rat rod. It's going to look like a weird half-built car with a purple front end on it. So that idea is out the window. So the question is now, am I aiming to get that rear end sorted, get some running gear under it, and get it moving around? Or am I biting the bullet now and pulling the engine out, getting this thing onto a rotisserie and just doing a full build? And that means this thing won't leave the garage until it's out of paint jail, everything's back in, and we have a fully driving car. So yeah, they're the 2 questions that I have to answer, and I would really like your opinion. Most of you guys watching are watching for the Celica content, and a lot of you have your own project cars or have built project cars in the past. I want to know what you would do. Would you cut that rear end off and replace it? Or would you panel beat the existing one? And also, is it time to throw this on a rotisserie and bite the bullet and have a full rotisserie build? Or should I keep pushing it to be just the street car that I always intended? So throw those in the comments below. And while you're at it, don't forget to like the episode, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you want to see the next episode. In that next episode, we are going to keep working on Violet Crumbles. You know what they say? When you're going through hell, keep going. So I'm going to grab the boot lid off the TA22 and I'm going to do a bunch of measurements to see how straight the chassis rails are in comparison to this one, and we'll see where we're at. If things are looking good, we might start removing that rear end, or what I may do is fix the other quarter and maybe some of the rust. So look, I don't know what I'm going to do at this stage, but at the bare minimum, we're going to understand a lot more about how bad that damage is. So yeah, that just leaves us with the standard spiel. So if you're new to the channel, we'll put the full Violet Crumbles episodes up here, and I'll also throw some other content down here. Other than that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on The Build Room. Bye for now.